So we're going to look at chapter 20 called Imperialism. When you look at this word imperial, empire-ism, belief. And so what you're going to start seeing is by the 1900s, the empires like Britain, France, Germany, they're going to start shifting their focus. They're not going to be so worried about like just having colonies in the New World or in Asia. They're going to want to have direct control over those colonies. And so when you look at imperialism, you're starting to look at a shift. And this shift is going to be maybe a little bit more violent in some areas. So when you look at the spread of colonial rule, there are motives for why the Western powers are going to really want to directly control the colonies that they have. One of the big motives is the need for raw materials. When you're looking at Britain, you look at France, you look at Germany, these are areas that have industrial revolutions, and so they need more raw materials to keep feeding their actual industries. So they got to look for new places because they're becoming more and more cities, more urban area. Urbanization is spreading. They don't have a whole lot of rural areas to supply all the raw materials that they need. They're going to need new markets too. You can build and build and build and build, but people only need so much. So your own local people, your domestic people, they can only buy so much of your junk. And so you're going to have to start looking for foreign new markets. And people are looking for places to invest. Like they've been making all this money thanks to the industrialization, and now they would like to go ahead and invest their money in somewhere else, to make more money, to become richer, right? So Hobson is going to write this book called Imperialism, and he does it in 1902. And his book is going to say that if you want to be an economic power, you have got to be imperialistic. That the whole reason why we should have empires is for economic purposes. And this is kind of going to fuel this whole belief in like power politics. These countries are going to start taking over places, and they're going to start increasing their power because whoever has the most will have the most money, and they'll have the most power, and they'll be the best. So nationalism, remember, is the belief in your nation, your country, your ethnicity being better than everybody else. And this is a part of colonial rule too. The place that takes over your place is obviously superior, or at least this is what they thought. So you got power politics, and then you got the balance of power. Remember Otto von Bismarck, who united Germany, he believes that there should be a balance of power, and that's why he does like some alliances. And the European countries are doing alliances. And so you want, if France has this many colonies, if you're Germany, you would want to have at least as many colonies as Germany. Really what you would want is to have maybe more. So when we look at the goals of imperialism, one of the big goals is economic markets. And the economic market is going to allow for raw material like cotton, tobacco, something like that, sugar, so that you can refine it and sell it. You need new markets. Okay, so this is the economic markets. So you need to make the stuff and sell it to somebody. So economic reasons, economic markets. The next reason is this power, and we're going to call it military. So one of the big things that is a goal, a driving goal of imperialism is militarism, military. So wherever these colonial powers go, they'll put military bases in the areas. And that will ensure that your economic markets are secure, and it makes certain that no other country actually comes and messes with your country. So it'll be about making certain that the colony that you have stays your colony. And then the last reason for the goals of imperialism is social Darwinism, the white man's burden, Anglo-Saxon superiority. So there will be countries who believe that because their country is better, their race of people is better, that they're the fittest to rule. And so they're going to apply this on a world scale. So the fittest nations have the most colonies. They're going to have the largest empire. And a part of this white man's burden, or Anglo-Saxon superiority, is about teaching local people, that they're not as good as the Anglo-Saxon race or whatever race it was that took over the area. And so they're going to teach and spread their morals and their religion. And Christianity spreads during this time period. Whether the locals like it or not, it's going to happen. So the three goals of imperialism: economic markets, military, and white man's burden are Anglo-Saxon superiority. So tactics, more colonies and direct control than earlier. So when Europe is starting to look at becoming vast empires, they're wanting more land, and they want a closer hand in actually dealing with the lands. So remember, when you look at the American Revolution, one of the big reasons why the Americans are okay with the Revolution is Britain wasn't in their face every single day. You know, the King George III is not here, Parliament's not here, and so it's salutary neglect. Now, that's not going to be true in imperialism. In imperialism, the government's very much in your face, and they have direct control over your life. And so there's going to be a huge land grab that's kind of started by the West. And it started for the economic reasons, the economic markets. It's going to be also for military and political reasons. So you put your military bases there, and it ensures your government's power. By 1900, there's only a couple places that are actually going to escape colonial status. Japan, which is in East Asia; Thailand, which is in Southeast Asia; Afghanistan and Persia, they're going to be in the Middle East; and then East Africa is going to have Ethiopia. Now, some of the reasons why these places actually escape, Japan had done some reforms. They've been doing their own little reforms, and Japan is going to decide with the Meiji Restoration that they need to become an empire. Thailand is not going to be taken because it's a buffer colony between France and England. So they're just a buffer. They're like a safe zone. And then Afghanistan and Persia, they're not going to get taken. They're in the Middle East, and that's too close to the Ottomans, who are still there. And Ethiopia and East Africa, it's just not going to be taken either, because you really just can't get into those areas because it's too close to the Ottoman Empire for Afghanistan and Persia. And for Ethiopia, it's just not an area that they're going to be able to get into well. When you look at the opportunity in the Orient is applying to Asia, okay, the Orient, Asia. The colonial takeover in Southeast Asia is mostly after 1800. So the Philippines are going to be under the Spanish, and the Dutch East Indias are going to be under colonial rule. By 1900, Southeast Asia is pretty much under colonial rule. Singapore is going to be Britain's Stamford Raffles, and so what this is just, it's going to be a major stopping point for traffic, and it's going to be because you're going to have your streams, and your steamboats are in this area, so it's just going to be like, almost like a rest stop. Vietnam is going to get taken by France, and they get taken by France by force. Eventually, France will get Cambodia and Laos, and this is going to be the Indo-Chinese Union. So they're going to France is kind of taking over this area. So they take Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, all areas that will cause some issues in the 1960s, because these areas will be very, very poor, and they will be areas that will appeal to communism. Like, communism will take root there because of the poverty. Because when France takes these areas, they just put plantations there so they can get the raw material for their factories. In Thailand, they're going to remain independent because France and Britain just find it very useful for them to remain independent, because they're that nice buffer. But they introduce Western learning into Thailand. So Britain and France are both going to introduce Western thought into the area. The Philippines are going to be lost from Spain to the United States. So the United States will take the Philippine Islands. George Dewey is going to conquer it in the Spanish-American War, and the U.S. is going to take it. And the U.S. takes it in 1898 to prevent Japan from taking it, because the Philippine Islands is pretty close to Japan. The Philippines do not want the United States to actually keep it, because at first, the Filipino people, they're very happy that the United States has come over there because we're liberating them, we're freeing them from the Spanish rule. A couple years down the road, we ain't left, and the Philippine people are going to start a little revolution. They're going to start a little protest. What the United States will do is the United States will promise the Philippine Islands that they will get their independence once democracy is actually established there. So once democracy is established, they'll go ahead and have their freedom. But that won't happen till 1946, so after World War II. So plan it all you want, it ain't going to happen for a very long time. And the reason why the United States does not want to give up the Philippines is because the Philippines is a very nice area. It's in between trade with China, so it's a nice place for trading with China, and the America is all interested in trading with China, like all the European countries are. So empire building in Africa. The slave trade has really declined, and it's declined because you have a lot of humanitarians who believe that the slave trade is hurting Africa, which it did. It really decreased the African population. And the Danes are going to stop the slave trade in 1803. The United States has stopped the international slave trade as well, and you'll have abolition movements going throughout the countries. So you just don't have a slave trade in Africa anymore by the 1900s. There's going to be a growing European presence in West Africa. There's not that much before the 19th century, because remember, the Europeans are just primarily interested in gold, trade like that, and slaves. They're not really interested in colonizing it. The slave trade had been controlled by the Africans, and there was an unhealthy climate and deadly disease. And so if you're a European and you go into Africa, there's a good chance that you might not make it out because of the disease and because of just the climate itself. It's humid in certain parts, it's really hot, and just Europeans just are not accustomed to that. So this is why they hadn't really colonized it like they will try at different times. So the decline of the slave trade in the 19th century, it really happens because of moral reasons. People do realize that it's wrong. And you're going to get Liberia that's going to be set up for free slaves. So people who are former slaves are going to go to Liberia. It looks like freedom, liberty, right? It's going to be set up for free slaves. And the French are going to be at Cape Verde. They're going to set up peanut plantations because Africa gets peanuts. And what you're going to start seeing now is that now that the trade is declining and slaves are free, we're getting a lot of abolition movements around the world. The Europeans are going to want to start Christianizing. They're going to want to start converting Africans over to Christianity, and they're going to want to give education. So you're starting to see this creeping European encroachment, and this is why, like, what they originally do in Africa is called an informal empire. Like they're like slowly getting their feet in the door. They're putting their foot in there, and every day they inch a little bit more in, a little bit more in. And so this is kind of how Africa is going to get diced up and sliced up by the Europeans. So Britain's a major power in ending international slave trade, and slavery ends in the United States in the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 says no slavery in the seceded South, and then in 1865 the 13th Amendment will eventually get passed. There's going to be an increase in legitimate trade, and this would be like natural resources, textiles, so they'll exchange natural resources for cloth and for any other manufactured goods that the Europeans are bringing in. There's a more permanent Western presence as you're starting to get closer to the end. As we get close to the 1900s, you're starting to see more Europeans coming in and kind of staying for a while. and the Gold Coast and Sierra Leone are going to be controlled by Britain. Sierra Leone has a lot of diamonds. They today are a very, very poor African country, and it kind of is because of what happens during this time period. The United States is going to establish Liberia for former slaves, and we're going to start getting a new class of Western educated Africans emerging. And this group is going to understand government, and they're going to understand revolutions.